Some of the other things that I think NGOs could be doing, I would divide into two groups. One, things that you could do and send to everyone that you have in your contact book at the same time. And then other things that you could do by building special relationships with particular media outlets, which I'm sure you're all doing anyway. What would be useful and quite possible to send to everyone are fact sheets with basic information and figures to do with the basic problems and issues that we're all talking about. Because we simply don't have those things at hand, we don't have enough research backup, and whenever one of those subjects come up, that's when we start scrambling around for the data. And in the end, because viewers don't miss what they don't know about, often that data isn't there because it's just so much easier not to include it and just have another useless WASP from someone, for instance. Also, there are specific issues that come up in the course of the political debate to do with diversity. I think it's especially true of Hungary, especially now that the extreme right is getting extremely strong, but it's true of some of our other countries as well. And if NGOs were able to anticipate this and send us fact sheets and information to do with those specific subjects, those specific arguments, and also give us lazy presenters like myself and lazy reporters arguments that we can use. So when we sit in the studio with someone who's banging on about bringing this new piece of legislation that will be quite discriminatory towards the Roma population, for instance, then we have a set of arguments, a set of counterexamples already given to us, which is not given to us by our own researchers. For instance, on our programme, contrary to how Newsnight works in the UK, where I worked for a short time, where every single interview would have a dedicated researcher or more likely a producer who otherwise does packages, calling all the experts, getting all the information, pulling all the data together and preparing Jeremy Paxman. What I have is a secretary who types a keyword into Google and then gives me all the articles, all 120 pages of usually the same stuff that she can find without even reading it. And that's on a good day, because on a bad day I don't even have the secretary there because she's taken the day off. So any extra information like that is incredibly useful, because although I'm trying my best and I am very benevolent, often I get swarmed by all this irrelevant stuff that I get given by my researchers, and I don't find the key facts quick enough. And when I'm preparing for 2 or 3 interviews, that could be a challenge. But when my colleague, the reporter who's doing the news package about it, is running around all day trying to do everything that in the UK 5 people would be doing, and in our countries I think most of the time it's a cameraman and a reporter who's doing it. Again, having this information accessible could really help. I'm giving you a couple of examples for things like this. For instance, the extreme right in Hungary has really thrown this phrase into the debate called gypsy crime. And there's a lot of debate going on about whether there is such a thing as gypsy crime. They often use it in one word, cigánybűnözés, which is the idea that there is a particular type of crime that is only committed by gypsies, and a lot of crime is committed by gypsies. So for instance, if fact sheets were sent to various journalistic outlets about what the actual figures are between, how much of crime can be attributed to any sort of racial pattern, and how much of it can't, that actually the population in the prisons is not like that, what might be behind it, and all the arguments about how this isn't really what the issue is. That would really help, because very often I see interviews done by other colleagues of mine who sit there faced with an extreme right-wing MP or just someone who runs for parliament, because previously the media's way of dealing with the extreme right was to pretend they're not there. We just had elections, they're in parliament, we can't do that anymore. So Hungarian journalists are overwhelmed with all these Nazis and fascists coming into our TV studios, making outrageous claims, and most journalists don't know what to answer, so they just move on to the next question. So if we had the arguments in our hand, again, that would be very useful. Truancy in schools is another example like that. They're just introducing new legislation that would basically take some of the social allocation away from families who don't send their children to school. And whenever the media talks about that, of course, and that's another bad thing, we tend to show pictures of gypsy children, which I think is pretty outrageous in itself. But again, everyone thinks about this as a gypsy issue, and the media perpetuates that image of this as a gypsy issue. but we don't have the figures, and we don't have the arguments about, you know, what it's like to go to a segregated school, for instance. A lot of the Gypsy children don't go to school because of the quality of the education they're getting, because of the hostile environment that they're in, because of the segregated nature of the school that they're sent to. My colleagues, most of them don't know this. So again, someone, a politician, is sitting there perpetuating this image, and the person asking the question will not have the right argument. It would be their job, so it's unfair for you to have to do their job, but I think it would really help if you helped us in that sense. So the targeted types of things which I think could be done, could really help, would be, for instance, to come to us with specific human stories that we can do, stories that are pretty much set up. So the lazy journalist doesn't actually have to do that much. And some of these stories could be about problems, and some of these stories could be about, you know, motivational, positive stories of someone making it out of a terrible situation. One of the films that I did, commissioned by the BBC, was about a Gypsy orphan who grew up in state orphanages and is now a very successful film director. And we went back and traced back, eventually found his family, traced back his childhood. These stories don't really get made by Hungarian television because, as I described, we have so many different problems to deal with. The managers don't come forward with these types of commissions. But if we were delivered these stories on a silver plate, all set up by an NGO, all the journalists who are desperately wrecking their heads to come up with an idea more original than what's in the morning paper, and most of the time can't, would be really grateful, because it would make them look good, and everybody likes a nice story. So, candid camera stuff, secret camera stuff, is again something that is a useful tool to show discrimination, for instance, but we have very little access to it. We have little access to the technology, and it's very time-consuming. I tried doing these types of things before, and in the regular news environment where we don't have the luxury of spending weeks and months working on a single project, there is no journalist who will have enough time to stick with subjects like this. But if an NGO can help with either the funding or even the personnel, then you could do simple things in conjunction with a media organization. For instance, just try to find a woman in her 50s, stick a candid camera on her, a secret camera on her, and let's see what happens when she goes looking for a job. And once you do this often enough, you'll have a very interesting example, and then you can work with the journalists to turn that into an actual package. They'll be very grateful to you because they wouldn't necessarily be able to find the woman to do this. And obviously, you can think of a number of other issues and people you can help to help us do our candid camera work. But also, the journalists can add to that and make it into something that they eventually feel they have editorial control of, and that they can therefore broadcast and feel confident about. Obviously, there are studies and there are polls which are done by NGOs on a regular basis, and we do report them. I think in a lot of cases it would be more useful if you form an exclusive partnership with someone first, because when an NGO comes out with data like this, we usually just say in a quick throwaway way, oh yes, this came out and these are the figures and isn't that awful. But if we had the feeling, I'm talking about my program, but it would be true of any other or newspapers as well, that this was a real exclusive, it was done by us in a way, and we were first, then even though we weren't paying for it, and even though it wasn't necessarily even our idea, we would devote a lot more time to it. And then everybody else would publish it the next day anyway, because it would already be on the news agenda.